Hi, I'm Carl Franklin. I think we deserve a break from all that business code. So let's write something fun. In this episode of Blazor Train, I'll show you how I made a logic puzzle game in Blazor. This particular type of puzzle shows a 4x4 grid of cells containing 4 images in random order for each row. The top row is made up of 4 people, the second row is beverages, the third row is animals, and the last is food. The game reveals 3 cells that have already been solved. You have to read the hints and find out which pictures go where. It may sound strange, but I know you'll figure it out. I gotta warn you though, the game is addictive. Ask me how I know.
How do you know?
We're building a logic puzzle game right now, right here on
Blazor Train!
So if you're looking for the repo, it's right here at Carl Franklin on GitHub, Logic Game, and all of the instructions of how to recreate this game are right here. But in this video, I'm going to take you through the code, but first, let's play the game. Let me show you how this works. Well, the first thing you should do is click the What is this button, and that pulls up a dialog box that explains everything. The goal of this game is to determine which pictures belong in which cells. Cells that are solved show a full-size picture. The game starts with 3 solved cells. Cells that are not solved shows a 4x4 grid of all the possible pictures. You can see them right here. Your job is to read the clues and solve the puzzle. You can remove a small picture in any unsolved cell by right-clicking it. For example, right there. You can bring it back by right-clicking on the black square where the small picture was, for example, right here. To solve a cell, you left-click on the picture you believe should be in the cell. Now, this is the first version, not complete yet, and as of now, it's not going to let you make a bad decision. You can only remove possible pictures if the picture is not the solution, and you can also only select a picture if it is the solution. In a future version, I'll add that feature. All right, so these are my hints, and you can see as I move around here, Carl, Scott, Patrick, and Richard are the 4 people. All right, so it's really a 4x4 grid. This is one cell. This is the second cell in the first row, third cell, fourth cell. The next row is beverages. So you have wine, you have beer, obviously, tea, and coffee. And the next row is animals. Puppy, kitten, a monkey, and a bear. And the next row is food. Burger, taco, sushi, and of course, pizza. So every time you run this, every time I just refresh the page, the solution gets shuffled. In other words, all the cells get shuffled, so we don't know which one belongs where. And 3 of them are revealed or solved. So from these 3 solved cells and from the hints, we can figure it out. Now, I have this hint filter. And for example, if I want to start with coffee and find all the hints that have to do with coffee, I can just start typing coffee. And I have 2 that match. The column with Patrick is between the column of the burger and the column of the coffee. Well, that tells me something. That tells me that we have a column with the coffee. The next one over is the column with Patrick. So I'll click on Patrick and notice that Patrick is removed as a possibility from the other cells in this row. And the next one is the burger. So go down here, click the burger. Now you can click this check mark here just to tell yourself that, hey, I've already used this hint and applied it. So the next one is Patrick is either in the same column as the puppy or the coffee, but not both. Well, we know Patrick isn't in the same column as the coffee, so it must be the puppy. So I'll clear the hint filter, and now I'll type sushi. Sushi is in the same column as the beer. Okay. So that's this. Very good. The column with the sushi is next to the column with the bear. Well, we know that. Column with Carl is between the column with the sushi and the column with the T. Well, that tells us that sushi, Carl, T are these solutions. And by doing this, we've now solved the wine cell. So what else do we have? Taco, pizza. Let's look for taco. Now, you don't have to use this hint filter, but it helps you easily group the filters however you want. Well, the taco and the monkey are in the same column, right? So this can't be the taco. So this has got to be the taco, and this has got to be the monkey. Now let's look at, say, Scott. The bear is either in the same column as the burger or Scott. Well, we know the bear and the burger are in the same column. The monkey is either in the same column as Scott or the taco, but not both. So that means Scott and the taco can't be in the same column. So this is Richard. And when I solve this, guess what? A little confetti flourished. Now you can refresh the browser to play again. And you get a whole bunch of new hints. One thing I didn't show you is how to remove possibilities. So for example, the beer is in the same column as the taco. So I could just click the beer, or I could right-click the beer in this column and right-click the beer in this column, and then boom, the beer gets solved. So basically, when you figure out, oh, well, this particular thing could not be in this particular column, you can right-click on it. For example, the column with Carl is between the column with the bear and the column with the pizza. So that means we know this isn't the bear, so I can unclick that. We also know that this has got to be the pizza, and this has got to be the bear. Okay, that's how you play the game. You can play it to your heart's content at logicgame.azurewebsites.net. Now let's dive into the code. So I've got a Blazor server application here called Logic Game. And let's just set up the project here. I'm going to use Blazor modal. Double click on the project file, add Blazor modal, and there you go. If you don't know what that is, go back and look at modal dialogues in Blazor Train. Next, we're going to add some global usings to the top of program CS. I'll add this line right here, builder.services.add Blazor modal. And to underscore imports Razor, we'll add these using Blazor modal and using Blazor modal services. Now we need to configure app.razor and wrap the entire router in a cascading Blazor modal. That means we can access the Blazor modal on any page and in any component as a cascading parameter. Next, I'm going to add some stuff to the CSS file, and I'm just going to use the default site.css, go down to the bottom, and add these. So just a simple border to tables, rows, and columns. The main table is going to float left. Then I have a separator span that's going to go between the columns, a bold span for when I want to make the font bold, a canvas for the confetti, and a border for solved cells. Next, we're going to switch over to server render mode. So the render mode here will be server for the head outlet and also for the app component. So let's start with some models and images. I'm going to add a cell model. So this represents a cell, well, the code behind a cell, right? We have a name that gets displayed when you hover over the picture. We have the file name minus the path of an image associated with that cell. Talk about images in a second. Now I have the index, and I'll talk about index in just a minute, but this is essentially 0, 1, 2, or 3, depending on which one of those 4 pictures is the correct solution. Now I have a Boolean array called possibilities. This represents whether the possible solutions are being shown. If they're false, they're not shown. If they're true, they are shown. If they're all false, the cell is considered solved. So here's a Boolean is solved that returns true if all of them are false. And here's a method solve, which sets them all to false. Then I have a constructor for the name, file name, and index. And I initialize the possibilities all to true. All right, let's grab the images. I'm going to download the zip file from the repo. And that has the images in it. Going to go to the web root, grab the images folder, and just drop that in my local web root. So there we go. These images are 100 by 100, and you can use any images you want, right? They don't have to be these particular images. In fact, I'm encouraging you to customize this game so that you can play it with pictures of your friends or family or whatever. That's much more fun. All right, so let's clean up the template files. I'm going to delete the data folder. I'm going to go into the shared folder. I'll delete the nav menu and survey prompt. I'm going to delete fetch data and counter. In program, I'm going to delete line 3 and line 12. I'm going to go to main layout, take away the nav bar and the top bar, and we're left with this. I'm going to go to the index page, and I'll just delete all this stuff. So let's just start with the cells themselves and the images. I'm going to add a code behind class for IndexRaiser. Now, this is the grid. This is how I chose to do it. A list of cells. And I have 2 of them. I have one that's in the original order, which I'm setting here. And then I have assorted cells, or you could think of them as shuffled. They're not necessarily sorted, they're shuffled. Okay? So in every game, we shuffle those cells, in each row. And that's the whole point of the game, is you have to figure out where they are. So the outer list is the rows, and the inner list is the columns. A list of cells. So here on initialized async, I'm creating a new list of cells with Carl, Scott, Richard, and Patrick in that order. And I'm adding that to my cells. Cells is a list of cells. Row 1 is a list of cells. So I add that to cells. And I do the same for row 2. These are the original locations: wine, beer, coffee, and tea. Row 3, puppy, kitten, monkey, bear. Row 4, burger, taco, pizza, sushi. And next, I'm calling a method to shuffle the cells. Well, let's add that now. So the first thing I do is I make a copy of cells. And here's how you do that. If you copy it to an array and then to a list, you've effectively made a deep copy. Now I'm doing some randomization here, and I'm using the hash codes of regular old objects as the seeds for random. I actually get random numbers in 2 different ways in this app. So I want to show you that there are 2 different ways to get them. If you're going to use random, definitely use a seed. And then here's what I do. Sorted cell 0 is the first row, and all I'm going to do is order it by a random item. I'm going to do the same with sorted cells 1, which is row 2, row 3, and row 4. Now I'm going to pick 3 random cells to reveal by X and Y. For that, I need this getRandom function. So I know this is a little strange looking, but let me add getRandom, and then we can go into what it does. So first things first, random number generator is in system security cryptography. So we'll get that using statement up there. So I'm going to get a random number with 1 as the lower bound and 4 as the upper bound, right? But notice that I pass 5 sorted cells count, which is 4 plus 1. That's because the getInt32 method takes 1 higher than the last value. Okay, so what is this? I have an array of ints, not these. It's null by default. And here's what it does. If you pass in an array of integers, that's a constraint that says, I want you to return a random number, but make sure it's not any of these numbers, right? Because what we're going to do back in shuffle cells is we first get an X value, and then we get an X value that isn't going to be the one we just picked, right? It can't be. We need 3 unique random values. And for the third one, we're going to pass an int array with both x1 and x2. And we're going to do the same exact thing for y. So now I've got x, 1, 2, 3, which are all random between 0, 1, 2, and 3. And the same for y. So I basically got random rows and columns. Then I'm going to pull out lists of cells by the row. So image row 1, and because this is returning a number that's 1 based, I subtract 1. Image row 2, image row 3. And now I solve the cells. So this is, remember, picking 3 random cells and solving them. So before I get into this code, let's just go down here after shuffle cells, and let's see if they've actually been shuffled. So I'm going to look at the first row, sorted cells first, and then the first cell in the first row. I'll put a breakpoint here and run it. Okay, now in the immediate window, let's examine them. First cell.name, Richard. You see that? So let's look at cells. Cells first name, and that should be Carl, right? So the first cell in our cells list of cells is Carl, and the first one in our sorted or shuffled list of cells is Richard. So the sorting is clearly working. All right, so before we go down the rabbit hole of logic, let me tell you about what I expect here in the main page. Now, you might have thought it would be easy to just create a table with 4 rows and 4 columns and put all sorts of stuff in here and connect to all the cells and all that. And yep, you could do that. However, what I want to end up with is to iterate through the list of rows. And in each row, I want to display a component that represents the UI for a particular cell. To do that, we're going to create a component called Puzzle Cell Razor. So I'm going to add that to the shared folder. All right, there's all sorts of squiggles and errors and things because the code behind isn't there yet, but let's just take a look at the logic here. Remember, this is UI for one cell. So we're going to have a cell parameter. And if it's solved, I'm just going to show the image of the file name. That's it. I'm going to show the full image. Otherwise, I need to show a table with a 4x4 grid, which means one row with 2 items on top and another row with 2 items on the bottom. Right? So this is for every cell. Now you can see if I was going to do a 4x4 grid of these in the index, it would become unmanageable. All right, let's add the code behind. Now, the only thing that isn't resolved here is this custom event args, class cell mouse event args. I created that myself, and we're going to need it. So let's add it. So this combines a cell and an image index. Now, I know that the cell has an index in it, right? We have an index. That's the original index. But we're going to need to pass the index of the position in the grid, okay, in addition to the cell, to an event handler. So let's look at puzzle cell a little deeper. So this particular thing right here is going to be duplicated 4 times. The first one was cell possibilities 0. The second was cell possibilities 1, 2, and 3, etc. So this is always the same. So remember, if the cell is solved, we just show the image. Otherwise, we're showing a table of images. So now I have this on context menu, and that happens when you right-click. So when we right-click on an image where the possibility is true, in other words, that is an image, not a black square. This is the black square. Then when I right-click on it, I'm going to call show or hide, passing a new cell mouse event args, cell 0, right? Because this is cell possibility 0 that we're handling here. So the index is really to which of the possibilities it is. You can see down here it's 1, down here it's 2, etc. So what does show or hide do? This is a helper method to show or hide one of the smaller images using a custom class which contains both a cell and a small image index. So I get the cell, and I'm checking to see if we're deselecting a possibility. In other words, possibilities with this index is true, meaning that the image is being shown. I'm going to make sure this is not the solution image. And this is what I would change if I was going to allow you to mess up. But right now, you can't mess up. It's not even going to allow you to deselect an image if that is the solution. So the first thing I'm doing is calling image file name, passing the cell and the index. And I suppose I could have put it in arg. I could have just passed args, but whatever. So this guy is a helper name to get the file name of a smaller image given the index, which is 0, 1, 2, or 3. So this is how I have to do this. I get the cell's parent list in the sorted cells with a little link from X in sorted cells where X contains this particular cell. That gives me the row 0, 1, 2, or 3, where this particular cell is. I get the index of that row in sorted cells. And now I go to cells and get the cell with that row index. And this is the original list of cells, the unsorted list. And then I use the column to retrieve the original index file name. And I also pass images right there, image file name. Now we have to rewind a little bit. All right. We started with show or hide. Show or hide was calling image file name, and I'm seeing if that cell file name is part of that image name. In other words, just the image name. If it is, I know that this is the solution image, and I'm going to return. Then I just do a switch. Cell possibilities with the index equals not cell possibilities with the index. And then I notify the UI by calling this cell changed event handler. Cell changed is an event callback. And in my index, when I get cell changed, I'm going to call this guy right here, which we have not written yet, update game state. All right, let's go back here. On context menu, prevent default is true. That means tell the browser to swallow that right click. Now, if I left click on it, on click, I call solve cell and notify. So it's a helper method to solve a cell and update the UI. Pretty much it. And only solve if the index matches the correct answer. On mouse over, I'm going to call show image name. This is a helper method to raise the image hint changed event. And I can also pass this index, and if it's -1, we can use the cell name. Otherwise, we can use the name of one of the small images, which I get by index. And either way, I'm calling the image hint changed event handler right there that passes the string. And in the index page, I'm going to change that little text at the top that says, Carl, Patrick, Richard, coffee, whatever. All right. So now it's just source and style. I have this small cell width and large cell width as variables because I don't like burying them in CSS. I want to see them in my code. All right. So that is if cell possibility 0 is true. If it's false, we're just going to display a black div. But we have to handle the context menu, show or hide, prevent the default. On mouse over, we're going to show the image name, and we're just creating a black div. And the rest of it is repeated for each cell possibility. So that's our component. Now let's focus on the application, logic, markup, and code. First thing we're going to do is add a class called hint. And every hint has a hint type, which is an enum. So let's add that. Now, I'm only using 4 of these hint types right now. But if you want to expand this game to use other hint types and maybe even more columns and rows, you can do that. So these are the ones I'm using. Same column, which means X is in the same column as Y. Next to, which means the column with X is next to the column with Y. Between, which means the column with X is in between the column with Y and the column with Z. And this, not that, means the column with X contains either Y or Z, but not both. So I have a hint text. I've got a list of cells that are involved in the hint. Because remember, I was just talking about X, Y, and Z. Well, I'm going to add those cells into the hint. Then I have checked a Boolean, which is a courtesy to let the user check off hints already processed. You saw that in the game. When I was done with a particular hint, I checked it off. And now this is a really important method, contains cells. All we want to do here is return true if this hint already contains the cells by name, not by object reference, but by name that I'm passing in. And then I'm going to call this with a link query so that when I create a hint, I can look at all the hints and determine whether a hint with this particular type and these particular cells already exist in my hints list. You don't want to duplicate hints. All right, well, I'm using a little JavaScript for 2 things. One is to set the focus to that hint filter tag, and another is for the confetti explosion. So here's my set focus. I've showed you this in other Blazor trains. It's a little stupid JavaScript trick to set the focus and handle the situation in which the element doesn't yet exist on the page. And then I have my explode confetti method. And I got all this code from an excellent website, CodeHim. And here's the JavaScript confetti explosion effect. All right, now let's add that help modal dialog. So I'm going to add a new Razor component called help modal. I don't know, it just came to me. Here's my text. Here's my Blazor modal instance and a close method. Simple. Now we're getting into the meat of it. So let's replace this stopgap code behind with a full implementation. So we have the message that goes at the top of the page. We have the image hint that changes when we hover over an image in a cell. We have our list of cells, our original order, our shuffled cells, our sorted cells. We have a list of hint called hints. We have the hint filter, that string that we're going to bind to a text input tag to filter in real time. And how we filter it in real time is this, filtered hints. So this is a little trick where you can use the little syntax we're using the hint filter in real time to filter that list. Here's the big cell width and the small cell width. Now I have this canvas display. So this is CSS, display none, display block. This is so we can turn the canvas on and off for the confetti. Here's my modal. Here's my JavaScript runtime. Now I have this clear hint filter method with an X button. Just calls hint filter and then set focus. Back to the text box. Show help shows the help modal. No big whoop. On cell change is that event handler. We're going to call update game state. So whenever a puzzle cell raises that event because the user has changed or clicked on something or whatever, we're going to call update game state. On image hint changed, we're only going to show that image hint if the puzzle is not solved. If the puzzle is solved, we don't show that because we have a message, refresh the browser to play again. And we don't want hovering over one of those images to change that. Now, we have 4 methods that generate clues. So these are all the same pattern, but they're a little bit different, right? Because of what the clues are. So the first one is generate the same column clue. Same column says X is in the same column as Y. Create a new hint. Type is same column. I'll pick 2 random rows, get random and get random without that first one in it. I'll pick 1 random column. I'm going to get the list of cells for each row. I'm going to add those cells to hint.cells. And now we're going to call that contain cells, but we're going to do that in a link query. So it's going to return not null if we already have a hint in the hints collection of this type using the same cells. And if that is not null, then another hint with those cells already exists and we're going to bail out. Now we are returning a hint here. So in this case, we're returning null. So now I'm going to construct the hint text. And because this hint text starts with an item itself, I got to capitalize the first character of that cell name. So first item is in the same column as the second item. Next, we have generate a next to clue. Next to says the column with X is next to the column with Y. Here's our hint. Now I'm picking 2 random rows, but now I'm randomly picking 2 columns that are next to each other. Okay? So remember, getIn32 takes the upper boundary that is not reachable. So I basically want between 1 and 3, not 1 and 4, because I'm going to add 1 to the second column, right? And that means they're next to each other. So this could, if this returns 1, this will be 2. If this returns 2, this will be 3. If it returns 3, this will be 4, but it's not going to return 4. So now I pull out the list of cells for each row, just like before, add them, look for a match. This is exactly the same code. And now construct the hint text. So the next one here is generate a between clue. Between says the column with X is between the column with Y and the column with Z. So I'm picking 3 random rows, randomly picking 3 columns that are next to each other using the same method. And now I get the list of cells for each row, add the cells to my hint cells, do my match test, and the hint text. Finally, this is the this not that clue. That's a clue that says X is either in the same column as Y or Z, but not both. Or more accurately, either Y or Z are in the column with X, but not both. 3 random rows, 2 random columns. Now, because I need to randomize the list of cells, otherwise the first cell would always be the solution, I create a temporary list and then randomize it into a short list. So I really only have 2 here, but I want to randomly arrange them. Otherwise, the correct solution would always be first. So add the cells, do the match test, construct the hint text. It starts with the first item, so I got to capitalize it, yada, yada, yada. All right, good. Here's get random. Already went through that. Update game state. This is probably the trickiest code I had to write. So it makes sure that the state of the cells is correct, right? Every time something changes, we have to go through this. So I'm going through each of the rows, sorted cells. I'm getting the row index. I'm getting all the solved cells in this row and all the unsolved cells in this row. And now I'm going to remove the solved image from all the unsolved cells, the small images. So for each cell in the solved collection, I get the original image index 0, 1, 2, or 3. And then for the not solved, right? Let's say the solved is Carl in the first row. Well, then not solved is going to be Richard, Patrick, and Scott, right? So for each of those, I'm going to set the possibilities for my index to false. So that effectively removes them from the possible solutions. So now I have to go into a loop. I have a Boolean changed, and I'm checking again. I get my not solved from X in cells list. Remember, we're one row here, right? And if I only have one cell left unsolved, I'm going to solve it. And now I have to set my Boolean that I've changed something. Otherwise, I want to find any cell with the only possibility, 0, 1, 2, or 3 from not solved, right? And if I get one back, I'm going to solve it in every case. And then if I haven't changed anything, I'm going to break. Otherwise, I'm going to go around and do it again. Now, is the puzzle solved? Yeah, we're done. Congratulations, you did it. That's my message. I set the canvas display to block. I set the image hint to refresh the browser to play again. And I explode the confetti. Here's my is puzzle solved. Returns true if the puzzle has been solved. I have to go through and find out if everything is solved. Here's how I generate hints. I go into a loop and I'm doing a same column clue, a next to clue, a between clue, and a this not that clue. And if the hint comes back not equal to null, I'm going to add it. And if the hints count is 20, because 20 is the maximum hints I want to show, I'm going to break. I do that for the second one and the third one and the fourth one. Now, if they all come back null, meaning that we have less than 20, but for some reason, we've got all the clues that we can possibly generate, then I'm going to break. Then I randomize the hints, and there we go. Shuffle cells we started talking about before until we got down to update game state, which we know what that does, and generate hints, which we know what that does. Now, all we're doing on after first render async is if the first render, we're setting focus to the hint filter. And we already looked at this, creating the cells and shuffle cells. All right, I think we're ready to look at index. So I've got my message across the top, a button to show the help, the what is this button. Here's my image hint and my main table. And I go through all the cells in sorted cells, which is a list of cell, remember? So these are the rows. So a sorted cells is a row. So here's my TR, and I have a TD with 4 columns, right? Each column is a puzzle cell. So I have the cell that I'm working with. I have my list of cells. I have my list of sorted cells, my widths, small and big. Cell change is going to be handled with on cell change, and image hint changed is going to be handled with on image hint changed. Now I also have this separator span here because I wanted to put a little space between each column. If you remember when we were looking at site CSS, separator span width is 12. That's that. This div right here is going to float to the right because this main table includes float left CSS. So this will be to the right and it'll wrap around. So here's my hint filter, label, bold. And here's my input, the ID hint filter, so we could set focus to it, binding to the hint filter string on every keystroke. We have the canvas. We just have to have it somewhere, right? We don't have to necessarily have it in the middle of the page. It just has to be somewhere. Here's the button to clear the hint filter, which has a little X in it. And then I show the hints. In a div, we're going to show a checkbox bound to hint checked and the text. And folks, that's it. Let's play again. All right, so I usually start with the ones on the ends if they're there. So let's start with coffee. The burger is in the same column as coffee. That's easy. Now let's go to pizza. Pizza's in the same column as the wine. Very good, they go together. Scott is either in the same column as the tea or the pizza, but not both. Well, he could be here. He could be here. But he's definitely not here because that's not tea or pizza. So we'll take him out of there. The column with Patrick is next to the column with the pizza. Yes, it is. Scott is in the same column as the pizza. Well, there you go. So that one is done as well. Let's look at Scott. The column with the sushi is between the column with the beer and the column with Scott. So Scott, sushi, beer. Good. Now let's look for me, Carl. Column with Carl is next to the column with the sushi. That means I'm right here because the sushi is here. And we haven't done any of the animals yet. So let's start with puppy. Puppy is next to Carl. So I can get rid of this and I can get rid of that. And I'm done with that hint. Column with the tacos between the column with the puppy and the column with Patrick. Patrick, taco, so that must be the puppy. How about the bear? Richard is next to the bear. Well, that's easy. The bear is in the same column as the taco. Yes, it is. The taco is either in the same column as the bear. Yes, it is. Or the wine. No, it's not. All right, kitten. The column with the kitten is between the column with the taco and the column with the wine. So that's the kitten, and boom, we're done. Have a good time playing the logic game and modifying it. It's a public repo, so go for it. I'll see you next time. Now back to you in the studio, Carl. You know, I've been playing games like this on Windows for years, going back to the 90s. You think a 4x4 grid is hard? Try 8x8.
That's lame.
Well, sometimes you get sick of shoot-'em-up games and need to use your brain, or lack thereof. Hey, thanks for riding the rails with me today. This is where I jump off. I'll see you next time.
Blaze a trail.